So I've been shopping for a new headset to replace my 9-ish year old Triton 5.1 surround gaming headset for some time now. I purchased this thing for the sole purpose of being a gaming headset, and it was a good gaming headset for about 6 years. Then the drivers started to wear out, build quality's not the best, they're not supposed to flex. And there were some other issues that started arising with the headset as it wore out, but it worked, it served its need. Now, however, I've had to hold the ear cup on by hot glue, which is not doing a very good job, and they're really starting to crackle, pop, and sound pretty darn terrible, unfortunately. So it's time to replace them. And when we go to replace stuff, we often look at reviews, and I found for the Sennheisers, the Steel series, and the Barrel Dynamics that I looked at, a lot of the reviews were not, it was hard to trust a lot of the reviews. I found a lot of inconsistencies or things that just didn't make a lot of sense. So let's address a couple of those. I purchased the Steel series and the Sennheisers here. I'm going to be keeping the Sennheiser GSP 500s. Let's talk about why over the course of a few points. All right, so I said that I purchased the GSP 500s and these are the ones I'm keeping. But I also said that there was some issues with the reviews. So let's take a look at some of those issues to start with. Now, you got to take a lot of reviews with kind of a grain of salt. So when I start digging into these reviews, I look for common themes, common problems, or common positives to try and start building a case for or against a specific headset. Now, I looked at pricing and I looked at features and I looked at a lot of things, and there was a Barrel Dynamics something 300. The GSP 600 was the one I actually was shopping for, and then the Steel Series Arctic 7 Pro Plus Gaming DAC. And I ended up buying the Steel Series and the GSPs, mostly because I didn't like the look and the layout of the Barrel Dynamics, the microphone being part of the ear cup, and then the way the headset was deployed with the band across the top, just not something I wanted, because the headset I had before my Triton had a similar headset layout and design, and it fell apart really quickly, so I didn't want to go that route. So I went with those two. Now, a couple of the common problems I saw with the GSP 600s and then carried over to the 500s is that they had a problem getting them to respond, as if they didn't have enough power to drive them. Now, the resistance and the response range on all of these really should be driven by just about anything, but I think what's holding it back is the size of the drivers and the distance that they need to travel in order to create the different soundscapes or the different sounds that you need to be able to hear, from the lows to the highs. So when I first got them, I was a little concerned that I would have enough power to drive them. So I made sure that I had everything in place in order to do that, and we'll come back to that. But I purchased them knowing that there might be some problems being able to hear the sound. So when I got it, I hooked it up, plugged the cable into the side of the headset, which is removable because there's a dongle to connect it to a PS4. And I pushed the cable here, goes inside this red part, and you push it. And I pushed it a lot harder than I felt was really necessary, and it first didn't go in, so I pushed a little harder. Heard it click, it slid in, I was like, okay, we're good. Put them on my head, push play on a song, nothing, no sound at all. Pull up my playback devices in Windows, and I see the meters going on the output from the motherboard. I'm like, okay, so there's sound there. I start messing with the cables in the back. I've got the headset on my head, and I grab the connector and the earpiece, and I twist it and push a little bit, and boom, the left channel comes to life. I'm like, oh, okay. Twist and push a little more, both channels came online. But they were a little quiet, to be fair. Now, when I got them, I also tweaked the volume knob. This is the volume knob, and we'll talk about the layout in a minute, but the volume knob, I went all the way to the maximum, all the way to the minimum to get the range, and then I set it somewhere in the middle so I wouldn't blow these out or my eardrums. And I had it at about middle, and I really didn't have a lot of sound. I had to crank that sucker up pretty high to start hearing it, and it didn't sound all that great. So I'm thinking, what the heck's going on? So I turned it back down to medium, grabbed the ear cup, and I pushed really hard, and then I felt it start to give, pushed a little harder, boom, snapped all the way into place. This cable is not coming out without a lot of force. It's not a bad thing because they're not going to pull the cable out, but you're going to pull the headset off your head long before this comes out, which is kind of a good thing and a bad thing. But I was really surprised with how hard I had to push that thing in there. So I think that some people were complaining that they didn't have enough power to drive these things, or they didn't sound very good because the cable wasn't in all the way. Once that cable snapped in there, I had to quickly grab the volume and drop it down to about a quarter, about 25% of full power, because they came alive. They really were impressive with just that moment, like, hey. But it was surprising about how hard you had to push that in order to get it to respond. Now, the other part of that is because these are, I'm not going to say they're massive drivers and you have to have a whole bunch of power behind it, but if you have a basic, just standard motherboard onboard output, you're really not dealing with enough power to really make them sound or come alive to do everything that they need to do. I'm not going to say it won't work. I'm not going to say you're going to have a bad experience, but your mileage may vary. There were a lot of people who had them plugged into a PS4 and they said on the PC it sounds great. Plug it into the PS4, you can't really hear anything. They had the volume all the way maxed out and it wasn't working very well. And I think that's partly just because the PS4 is expecting an amplifier to boost the sound out, and there is no amplifier in this setup as it is. You're getting just the headset. Now my motherboard has what they started doing it about, I want to say 5-6 years ago, where the onboard solutions of higher end motherboards started offering better on solutions. So Sound Blaster, trying to recoup a little bit of the market share for sound, decided to start putting chips on the motherboards, and they've isolated them away from the other channels for power routing through the board to try and isolate and create better sound. And then one of the things that my motherboard has is a auxiliary power option. So you get an extra power cable, you take a 4-pin Molex and you plug it into a little 4-pin that plugs into a header on the motherboard as a power auxiliary. And then there's a little switch on the motherboard that's an audio boost. You switch that on and it does two things. There's 2 USB ports that it creates a more consistent 5 volts. I've seen some people do some testing, it's really like 4.4 to 4.6, but it's fairly consistent within that range. So instead of fluctuating in the 1.5 to 3 range, it stays more consistent at the 4.4, closer to the 5 volts. So you get a much better consistent output. Likewise, for the onboard sound options, those jacks all get amplified. So this, for me, was not a problem. Now, my other headset, I didn't really have to use the onboard option because this has an inline amplifier powered off of a USB port. So you turn it on and it provides the amplified power for this. So I never needed to use the onboard solution and I never really knew how it was going to respond or function. So for anybody who has a reasonable or a mid-range to high-end gaming motherboard and you have one of those onboard options, you're not going to have a problem getting these headsets to go, provided you have the cable plugged in. So those were the 2 main complaints that I saw online about these headsets as far as getting them to run. Let's take a look at fit, finish, and comfort, because that was another major complaint that I saw. All right, now build quality, aesthetics, and fit, finish, comfort are going to be very subjective. No matter who you are, you're going to have certain tastes. You're going to like a certain design, you're going to like certain elements, and you're going to have a uniquely shaped head that is very difficult for somebody to build something universal that fits. If I look at my old headset here, this thing has very loose fitting cups. Now the left one is less broken, so you can see it articulates, but again, these cups are not supposed to really move. The earpieces are. The holders here aren't supposed to wiggle. But when you put it on, you can see how little it actually moves before it goes on my head. And the way I have this set up is the upper band hangs pretty much across the top of my head, and these loose fitting ear cups are basically resting almost on top of my ears. Other problems with this is these ear pads. The front's a little squishy, but the back is like 100% more firm and hard. It doesn't move at all. The other problem is you can see these are not very deep, and there's a seam around the middle here that makes them very firm and very uncomfortable. So these are not very comfortable. You can also see, I'll try to get it on camera here, but you can see where my earlobe over the last 9 years has been brushing against the driver. There is a piece of cloth here, but it's hard plastic behind it for the drivers. And that's uncomfortable after 3, 4, 5 hour sessions of doing anything. It's not even just gaming, because I use these for a lot more than just that. But you feel the fatigue. Now, it's easy to wiggle them and move them around and kind of change them the way they rest on your head a little bit, but ultimately you're still wearing them on your head for a very long period of time, and that's difficult to do. So with the GSP 500s and 600s, because they're essentially the same thing, the only difference is a little bit of a change in the cup foam, and the 500s are open, whereas the 600s are closed. Again, we'll get to that. Now, when you first get a pair of headphones, most people think of them like these older style, where you just have the ability to move the earpieces up and down, and that's how you come up with your fit. These are a very different type of solution, and I've never really run across one quite like this before, and that's part of the reason that I really liked it. Now, I'm still trying to get these dialed in just where I like it. I do have a setting that works really well, and I've played on it for about 3 to 4 hours consistently, and just some minor lift off, twist, and push back on my ears was all that was necessary over a little while. And it really wasn't that fatiguing, but it did feel a little tight. But there's a lot of different ways that the designers have come up for this. So first is the cup design. You can see this is an oval, more natural to the shape of your ear. So your ear is going to fit in there a little differently than your standard headphone. So these are more a giant rectangle. Some are giant circles, and they all fit differently. But in these, you can also see that the earpiece is angled off center to the headpiece. So when you put them on, depending on your ears, the headset's going to rotate kind of like this to get the best fit. So when I first put them on, I put them on like this and realized, okay, that's not good. I have to rotate mine forward a little bit. And when I felt the top, I realized, oh, that's actually kind of level the way it fits on my head. Now, the ear cups themselves, we already talked about the shape, but this foam is really quite deep, and there's a bit of an angle to the inside of it on the back. So it's kind of towards the front more flat, and then towards the back of your ear it concaves around to reach around the back of your ear in a shape like this. And I find that that actually really kind of helps it fit, because the back of your ears, at least in the back or back lobe areas, you kind of want to reflect some of that sound around. Now, I'm not sure if that's actually what they're doing or if that's just the way they created the housing. The foam back here is really just thin cloth. It's right up against the hard piece of plastic where the driver is, but the difference is that this foam is extremely thick. So when I'm wearing them, even if I push in, I still cannot feel the back of the housing with my actual earlobe. And to me, that's a really good thing, because that's one of the main fatiguing things for people, is that your ears are feeling the back of the headset's housing for long periods of time, and that's really uncomfortable. And as you can see on these, certain parts of my ear along the backside really scraped against it. Now, my ears don't really stick out of the side of my head very often, probably because I've been wearing headsets my whole life, but even then, they do stick off the side of my head. The back of my head kind of curves in pretty sharply, and so the back of my ears stick out compared to the back of my head, which is why here, as the back of the cup tries to go around the back of my head, they scraped. I have no problem with that on here. Now, the next part is the pressure points. You cannot assume that this is going to rest on your head just like any other headset. I mean, look at that shape. That is ridiculous looking. Part of the reason it's kind of so funky is the way they have a 3-point pressure system. So you can't just put it on your head and say, oh, my head is larger. Pull the ear cups all the way out. No, it doesn't work like that. I typically, as you saw on this headset, have mine almost all the way in. And on these, I've actually got them about 50 to 65% out. And it's just because of the way the comfort is. I don't have a large head. I have a more tall head. I'd say I'd have about an average. Not too small, not too large. I'm kind of right in the middle as far as my head width. Even so, I have had to extend these all the way out. When I first got them, I pulled the earpieces out a few notches. Now, unfortunately, there are no indicators here to tell you how far they are out, but there is a seam in the plastic right here that I could use to gauge and count the clicks out to get them exactly where I wanted them. When I first got them, I pulled them out about 1 notch, put them on my head, and it was like, ow. They were being clamped really hard into the side of my head, and that was not very comfortable. Well, that's where the second part of these comes in. On the top of the band here, there are these 2 levers that allow you to change the shape of the headband. And what this does is it either makes the headband more of an arch to go around your head, meaning you're going to rest most of the weight on top of your head, or you're going to flatten it out and put most of the pressure on the sides. Now, it depends on how you're doing it. I think I just said that backwards. When it's arched, you're using the ear cups to clamp, and when it's flat, you're using a headband to rest on your head. I think I said that backwards. But I've got two settings right now that are almost very well balanced. One setting's a little bit much on the ears and the other one is a little loose on the ears, and I haven't really felt on the head yet. But a lot of people were complaining online that I saw that these were really, really uncomfortable. And I saw a couple YouTube reviews from folks who are like, these are the most comfortable headphones I've ever worn. Well, it's very subjective. But I think that a lot of the problem was a lot of people were not taking the time to really understand the top and side adjustments that need to be made. The first 6 hours that I wore these headphones, I think I was making constant adjustments. I've had these things for almost 2 weeks now, and I'm still making some minor adjustments to it, but I'm so close to having it dialed in. Honestly, it took 6 hours to get my previous setting, which today I just started making a few tweaks to, because I found that right here on the upper forward section of my lobe and on the rear lower section of my lobe, there was a little bit too much pressure. And even now with my slightly loose settings, it feels really good. It's balanced where there's just a little bit of weight on my head and there's a more even disbursement of pressure around the entire ear. And if I lean forward, side, shake my head, the headset really doesn't move. It doesn't go anywhere. And if I look at my old headset, if I lean forward, it comes right off. And now I'm hanging completely off my ears, and that's the only reason it hasn't come off. You can't do anything with those because they're going to flop. So while the aesthetics may not be for everyone, and while comfort is very subjective, while they go to this kind of weird in shape, this is about where they go in my current settings to actually get some resistance and pressure on them. And that is perfect for me, but you have a lot of give in these. Now the third point is here on the back. Now it's not really a pressure point, but there are these metal pieces and hinges that kind of snap in to curve around the back of your head. And this works great for me because it closes around the back of my head. And for me, I have found that while initially these were very uncomfortable and I understood exactly what people were complaining about, after a bit of playing with them, I have found that the dual adjustment settings that you can make and the 3 points of pressure really works incredibly well. And the way it works is partly why it looks so industrial and so kind of bulky for some people, which again, I like. It sits on top of my head. Nobody's going to look at it. It might not be for you, but take a second look at the way you have your headset configured. If you have a medium-sized head or a small-sized head, I think you will be able to get these to fit really well if you spend some time getting the adjustments. If you have a very large head or a very tall head, you might run into some issues getting these to fit. Now, the other complaint that I saw mentioned on that was for folks who are a little more bald. Now, while I'm not bald and I don't shave my head, I do sometimes trim the top of my head pretty short. Not quite a buzz cut, but short enough. And I could see where this top foam, which is not really a padding at all, it's mostly just to protect anybody's head from brushing up against the hard plastic, might not feel very comfortable on top of your head when you're trying to balance most of the weight on top of your head, because these foam pads are not really there for support, not like the ear cups. This is just a little bit of padding to keep you from resting the hard plastic on your head. Similar to these, this foam up here, it does nothing. You really have to push on it to compress it. So if you do have no hair or you shave your head or you are bald, then you're really going to want to put a more flat approach across the top and maybe rest more pressure on your ears. And that may be something you don't like. For me, I'm not really resting enough on my hair to gain an extra boost off of these, because even with my hair, it's fairly flat and collapsed. You can probably see the band across my head because I've been wearing these for a while today. But when I put them on here, it's equal distributed right now between my ears and my head. And what's on my head, I feel it, but it's not a painful pressure. Right now I'm using the ears to support most of them through the clamping pressure, but through a little bit of rotation and readjustment on my head, I can change where that clamping pressure is actually happening. I can move them backwards, forward. I have simple adjustments that I can make to make them feel slightly different on my head. And that's either something you're gonna love, something you're gonna hate, but it's something you need to think about if you're getting a headset similar to this or one of these very headsets. All right, so let's take a moment and talk a bit about sound quality. I'm going to move these off to the side a bit. Now, I bought these Tritons, as I said originally, to be a focused gaming headset. The reason I did that was because while I do like high quality audio, at the time I purchased these, I was still in school for radio, television, and film, and as part of that, I had to purchase some high-end editing earphones. So these are my editing cans. They default to a 1/4-inch jack, although that does unscrew to a standard 1/8 inch. And these are designed to provide a really good response when you are needing to isolate sounds and focus in on editing, and that's why I bought them. Now, I've taken pretty good care of these because these are almost as old as these, about 9-10 years old. When you put them on, and if you look at these cups, they are circle. They are just a straight circle with no covering over this, and you can see it almost is made to go kind of in that indentation in your ear. These are not very comfortable for long periods of time, and you can see that headband has no give in it. They're meant to get clamped on your head and stay there. And that's why I wanted to go with a much higher quality and maybe a more name brand for my next set of earphones, because the drivers in these Sennheisers are really, really good. I would say that the drivers in these are better than my Koss earphones. And it was kind of surprising. I knew they would be really good sounding and I knew they would have good quality, but I was really kind of taken back by how good the sound was on these when I compared them to my Koss. I think I haven't done a lot of focus on comparing the two just yet, but when I was doing music playback in 2D with tweaking my equalizer and all that stuff, it was really surprising how good the sound was through these. Now in these, you can hear the music, you can get the sound, but it's like using earbuds off your phone. It sounds good, you enjoy it, but you really miss a lot of the sound. Hooking these up and firing up a FLAC audio file, you can start to hear a lot more of the range, you hear a lot more of the drums, you hear a lot more of the treble and the other sound instruments even. If you're listening to rock or punk, sometimes the bass guitar can kind of blend into a sub-theme or a sub-frequency that you don't audibly hear the stringing of it unless they're focusing on a bass riff or something like that. But with these, you can almost sometimes hear them plucking the bass guitar mixed into it. And it was nice to hear that. If you're listening to a good classical piece, you can hear the individual instruments, and it's a good experience. Now with movies, again, these were a 5.1 headset, so I didn't really mess with my drivers. The inline controls on these allow you to modify the sub, the center, the left-right channels, so you could tweak them however you needed to. So for movies, those did 5.1 really well. Now, these are just bog standard stereo headphones, but what has changed, similarly to what I mentioned earlier with the onboard sound card, is the drivers and the software emulation of surround sound. So now they have sound bars that use frequency and they bounce the sound off of walls to make it sound like it's behind you, or they change the tone of the sound that should be coming behind you so that it tricks your ear into thinking the sound is actually behind you. A lot of subtle tricks like that. They do a lot of that now with these and with the sound drivers. So in the drivers, you have a way to add or reduce surround sound to the actual playback of what you're doing. So for music, I set up a profile where there's no surround, and then I found that it was just a little bit too right and left. So I added just a tiny bit of surround back into it, and I was able to get a little bit more of a range, so it doesn't sound like it's just straight next to me. It sounds a little mixed in this range. And with both ears, it gives you a good experience to where you close your eyes, you lean your head back in the chair, and you can almost imagine there's a concert or something in front of you. And that was a great thing to hear. And being able to fake surround sound is something that's a little easier now, because games such as PUBG, they're only in stereo. And so a surround sound headset really doesn't benefit you any, because the sound you're getting is only output in stereo. So if you take the stereo output and you're tweaking that in software to modify the sound based on the spatial location of where the sound is coming from, it works pretty well. It almost works better than the 5.1 does. Now, in movies and things like that have really good 5.1 surround or 7.1 surround or Dolby Atmos or something like that, the surround isn't as good through these, but the overall sound quality more than makes up for it. Now, the downside to that is the software is not perfect. Sometimes what's right directly in front of you sounds a little too quiet until you turn your character's head a little bit in a game or the movie. Not a movie, I haven't had that in a movie, but in a game, if you're facing straight at the sound source, you turn just a little off center, you'll hear it a bit more through the ear cup that it's projecting through now, because the sound is driving straight through it instead of trying to be balanced. Little foible I found, but that's specific to the way the games are working and the way the digital surround works. But honestly, these are good for surround. The other benefit of having a nice set of earphones is when you turn it up, you're not just adding noise, you're not just making more sound in your ears, you're turning up the levels of what is already there. And so sometimes when you turn up those, you start hearing crackling and popping, and you'll hear the drivers vibrate as they reach their maximum extension. I think I turned these up to 50-60% when I was watching those movies, which is louder than I normally would turn them up. But instead of being presented with clipping or anything that really kind of hurt my ears, what I was getting was a more full soundscape. Yes, certain things were louder, but it was, the bass was more punching. It wasn't a like a Rice or Honda down the street where half their cars are vibrating apart. No, the drivers were built into a solid housing that the bass, boom, hit and moved on. And it was a good sound of bass. It wasn't the sound of bass, it was the feel of bass and depth. And that was something I really enjoyed. All right, now the one thing I haven't talked about yet is the actual microphone. Now the microphone itself is very good. Microphone technology really hasn't changed that much. They have a decent amount on the front for some noise canceling and a good pickup on the front. And it's on this nice boom that extends up and down. Now I understand from the GSP 600s that this articulated a little too easily. I still find this way too loose for my tastes. And I'm not sure if there's a way to adjust it to make it a little more stiff. It does have a bit of drag to it, but if you wanted to, you could flip it up and down. And I'm worried that that may wear out. Maybe that's the intent of it, but that's the way it is. Up position mutes it. You move it down, right there. There's a little click where the system engages and the microphone becomes unmuted, and then you can raise it. Now it's off. So for me, on my head, let me get the cable over here. I try to keep the mic about here. You want it a little bit below your mouth so that when you project out, the sound goes out nicely. And you don't want it right in front because then you'll pop it. And because it's off to the side about an inch away, you're going to get really good sound from it. And if you pop, the pop goes forward, which is why you have these little screen filters on things. And that's what would deflect the pop. Here, because it's kind of off to the side, you don't really have to worry about any pop or sound like that. The sound through the microphone sounds pretty good. I've got an audio sample I'll play for you right now.
Alright, and this is noise suppression and acoustic echo cancellation, both enabled within the Realtek and Windows drivers, but the plus dB is only at 10, so it'll be a little bit quiet, and the waveform should be pretty clean.
And you can tell that it's not too bad. Now this is plugged directly into my motherboard, so I'm having to use the onboard Realtek drivers to do noise cancellation and acoustic echo removal. And because of that, it does add a little bit of a digital sound to it as it tries to clean up the audio a little bit. And the noise cancellation is frankly, so you hear a little bit of background static. But if you focus in on just my voice, there's a good sound to it where you get to hear the richness of my voice. I sound more fluid and I sound pretty good, in my opinion, through that microphone. So I think the microphone is really good. I just wish that the drivers would be able to remove the noise a little better. You can record, because you're just using the onboard drivers through an analog signal, you can get up to 96,000 kilohertz, 128,000 studio quality. It's completely wasted on that. You can do 96,000 and it won't be too bad, but the problem is the drivers can't run their noise cancellation or the acoustic echo removal on anything above 48,000. So 2-channel, 24-bit, 48,000, you're gonna be fine. That's DVD quality. With my recording solution now, I typically record at 24-bit 96,000 because when I'm doing something more professional, I'm trying to really record a high quality mic sound, you want to have the highest quality that you can then edit down to what you need. So that's why when anybody is streaming, they'll use an external microphone because it's a dedicated high quality mic to pick up their voices. I typically rely just on these for Discord, Ventrilo, Mumble, any type of in-communication VoIP stuff, and as an emergency backup. I recently did an airport CEO video where I had to use the headset mic, which is actually this guy, because the SD card failed in my recording solution and I didn't notice in time. So I went through 2/3 of a couple videos running off of just that headset mic. And that's partly why I want to have a mic that can do a more richer sound. Yes, there was a bit of static to it, but I didn't have to worry about any digital distortion to the same degree or any real degradation to the quality, and it sounded really good. So I was pleased with the way that pulled it out. This, I think, sounds a little bit better than that. I have to play with the settings a little bit more. I typically run it at 2-channel, 24-bit, 48,000 hertz, and I'm using a plus 10 dB gain to get it there. If I add a plus 20 gain, it gets a little noisy for my taste, and that's something I'm not good enough to go into Adobe Audition or another program and kind of clean up. Maybe I'll take a look at that and see if it's something I can do long term, but the way I have it set up now sounds pretty good, and it was virtually plug and play with that. So overall, I'm very pleased with this headset for my needs and my personal tastes. I didn't like how a lot of the reviews just seem to be overly glowing of the headset. It has its faults. The issue with the weird funky layout and the multi-point pressure thing. It could be better explained, it could be better conveyed to consumers, because that's not going to be for everybody. The looks aren't going to be for everybody. But if you give it a chance, I think you might actually like the headset. The sound quality is phenomenal. I'm not going to say it's any better or worse than any of their other line, because I really don't have experience with it. I can, however, say that these will be very comparable to the GSP 600s. The reason I didn't go with the 600s is because they are closed. They seal around your ears and they isolate all other sound away from you to just play the sounds into your ears. And because of that, they're a little heavier, and they have a different ear cup on them. Now, these ear cups are interchangeable. You can just pop them off, but that's another $30 to buy the memory foam ones that they use in the other ones that people were glowing over. I have personally found these to be really good. It's a step up from what I had. So, hey, maybe they're lucky to be able to use high-end headsets all the time. But personally, I prefer open back designs for this type of an application, because I want to hear what's going on around me. And I'll try to capture it a little bit in B-roll, but there's a little grill back here where they've opened up the upper portion of the cup. So just this upper aspect of your ear is where you're going to be hearing anything external to the headset. And it really works surprisingly well. I've had my wife walk up the stairs next to me, and I could hear her coming up the stairs. It wasn't distracting. I could hear it in the background. And then when she leaned in next to my head to say good night, I was able to hear it smoothly through the earpiece and say good night without having to take the headset off or move anything. It was able to be heard. Now, I had these on, and my daughter got up in the middle of the night, opened the door and walked out, and I heard her door open, and I went, "You should be in bed." That's why I personally prefer these open backs, because I can still be part of my environment, because I'm not doing something so important that I really need to isolate the sound. And because the higher quality drivers in these, the sound I am getting is really good, so I don't have to worry about any issues like that. It's not like I live in a noisy house and there's tons of distracting sound. It's just if somebody knocks on my door, I want to be able to hear the door. The other benefit to open back is it can create a bit of ambience. There's a bit of a natural background bleed of sound that makes it feel a little more immersive. I talked about it a little bit with the movies, where you feel like you're in the theater. You feel like you're in a large open area. And that's something that closebacks typically try to remove. They want you to feel specific to the sound, whereas a lot of people prefer the more open feel. For my needs and my tastes, I'm very pleased with the GSP 500s. I don't think you would be wrong for not liking the look of them. I personally think they're awesome, but again, subjective. But the complaints that I saw online seemed a little bit unfounded, where people are like, these are the most uncomfortable headphones ever, and after an hour they're returning them from their own review on Amazon. Kind of surprising. So I hope you found this interesting. I hope you got maybe some more information about the headset that you were considering, and I hope that it was beneficial for you in that purpose. That's the reason I made it, because I was confused about a lot of the reviews out there. I ended up settling on 2 headsets and buying both, and I spent my time with the one that I thought was the better one and the one that I knew I really wanted to like, which I ended up liking. So that kind of leads into another option where, because I was prepared to have issues with these, I also purchased the GSX 1000. So let's talk about that in the next video.